Tensions are simmering in South Asia with fears of an escalation in violence between India and Pakistan. Now, this follows a deadly militant attack on April 22nd, which saw gunmen kill 26 people, civilian tourists on holiday in the picturesque region of Kashmir. Now, the Indian government blames Pakistan for the attack, while Pakistan has denied those charges. Let me bring in Michael Kugelman, then, analyst of many years specializing in the region, based in DC. Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tensions between India and Pakistan, they're not new. They share a militarized land border and they also share a history of hostilities, that have flared up from time to time since both countries were founded essentially nearly 80 years ago. But even within that context, this attack last month seems to have taken people by surprise. Could you help us understand why that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the attack was a surprise because it's relatively unusual for civilians to be targeted with violence in Kashmir, and particularly on the scale that we had in this recent attack. And also, the India-Pakistan relationship has been relatively calm over the last few years. The two countries signed a truce along their disputed border, the LOC, in 2021, and since then things have been relatively calm. So the fact that not only do you have this stunning attack in a region that generally does not have cases of civilians being targeted, but then a case of this attack happening and relations between India and Pakistan being plunged into one of their worst crises in years, because indeed, as you note, India has blamed Pakistan for the attack. So it's really quite stunning. It's just has goes against the trends of what we've seen over the last few years.
How have both sides responded in the days since? Because, we know the Indian government has blamed Pakistan for the attack. Does it have any evidence?
Well, it has not yet provided any evidence publicly. It has indicated that there are cross-border links to the attack, and it's important to note that historically there is a precedent of Pakistan sponsoring some of the groups, some of the violent groups that operate and stage attacks in Kashmir. And it's also notable if you go back to 2019, the last time you had a serious crisis between India and Pakistan, it was triggered by an attack in India-administered Kashmir, which killed 40 Indian security forces. That attack was claimed by Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is a Pakistani terror group sponsored by the Pakistani state. So there is that historical precedent. But indeed, in this case, India has not provided any evidence. There was a group called the Resistance Front, which initially claimed responsibility for the attack on Telegram, on social media. According to India, this group is tied to Lashkar-e-Taiba, which is a Pakistani terror group, a Pakistani-sponsored terror group. However, that group eventually retracted its claim of responsibility. So, yeah, it's tricky because India has not provided any evidence that Pakistan was involved, but there is the past precedent, and certainly across India, many believe that there was some type of Pakistani hand or sponsorship in this attack.
Now, we have seen a fair amount of posturing and rhetoric from both sides in the days since. We've also seen, reportedly ceasefire violations. Most recently, Pakistan has test-fired a ballistic missile on Saturday. What can an escalation look like between these two countries? Because at worst, we know they both hold nuclear weapons. But am I right in thinking that we are unlikely to see an all-out war?
Yeah, we're very unlikely to see an all-out war. The main reason for that is that both countries have nuclear weapons, and the India and Pakistan have fought multiple wars, but all those wars were fought before they each formally became nuclear states in 1998. So nuclear weapons really serve as a deterrent. But I would argue that we've already seen a fair amount of escalation because of the non-military actions that have been taken soon after the attack on the 22nd. India took a number of very muscular diplomatic measures, some of them being unprecedented. That includes suspending the Indus Waters Treaty, which is a long-standing transboundary river arrangement that had endured throughout wars and other times of bad relations between India and Pakistan. We've also seen all trade ground to a halt. The main land border has been closed, and ports have been closed, and so there's no shipping traffic. And Pakistan has reciprocated in many cases. It cut off another treaty between the two that had called for peaceful resolution of bilateral tensions. So, we've seen a lot of escalations on the diplomatic and economic front, there has not been any type of military actions by either side to this point. I do think that because there's a lot of pressure, domestic pressure on the Indian government to respond militarily, because there's so much anger in India about this attack that took place, I suspect that there is a good chance that at some point, maybe not in the next few days, but sometime down the road, there could be some type of visible response by India that would be described as targeting terrorist infrastructure in Pakistan. We can't rule that out. I mean, this is something that did happen in 2019 when India responded to that attack in Kashmir by staging airstrikes in Pakistan. But I think that my sense is that India will want to respond with a variety of responses. That could include trying to isolate Pakistan globally by pressuring Pakistan's donors not to provide assistance to Pakistan. It could entail pressuring a terrorist financing watchdog, the FATF, pressure that group to sanction Pakistan. So I think there's a lot of steps that India might try to take that don't necessarily entail military strikes. Even though much of the debate has been, what might India do in terms of a military response? There might be something small, though visible, to address all of the anger in India and also to degrade this threat of cross-border terrorism. But I do think that we will likely see a broad-based Indian response in the coming weeks. One final thing I'll say, we can't rule out covert activities by India in the coming weeks, which could entail targeted assassinations of militants in Pakistan. So there's a whole range of things that could happen, but that remains to be seen exactly how it plays out.
That is very interesting. In fact, all the sort of diplomatic escalations that you pointed out there, what is the role of international diplomacy then? Because we're already grappling with deadly wars in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Gaza, just to name a few. What is the US's relationship with both these countries, and has there been any intervention so far?
So, I mean, there is a past precedent of US governments intervening during crises like this between India and Pakistan, interventions that aim to push for de-escalation. And, the US has had some success in that regard in previous years. And I think in this case, what we've seen so far is from the Trump administration is some mixed messaging. I mean, initially we saw the U.S. expressing strong statements of support and solidarity with India, condemning the terrorist attack. But in more recent days, we've seen a push for de-escalation. In fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio spoke with his counterparts in both India and Pakistan calling for de-escalation. And most recently, in the comment that's received the most attention, Vice President Vance has said in a TV interview that the U.S. Hopes that any type of Indian response would not lead to a broader war. So my sense is that the Trump administration would like to see de-escalation, which meant no one benefits from a war. No one's interests are served from a war. And indeed, as you note, the world is on fire. We have these wars in Gaza and Ukraine. The Trump administration has said that it wants to help bring them to an end. So I would think that it would also want to play what role it can to try to move the needle forward on de-escalation in this case, even while the U.S. would want to make sure to signal to India that it supports India's counterterrorism imperatives. I mean, the Trump administration, much like the Modi government, takes a very strong stand against Islamist terrorism, and it would want to make clear to New Delhi that it understands India's concerns in that regard.
All right, Michael, we leave it there. Really appreciate you giving us the lay of the land. And of course, like you said, the world is on fire. And the last thing we need is another zone of conflict to keep our eye on and more lives lost. That is Michael Kugelman, author and South Asia analyst. Thanks so much, Michael.
Thank you.